So I'd like to start with a myth, or perhaps a story, told to me by Bav, who is our head of analytics. Looking back to World War II, only about 50% of the planes that went into combat came back and survived. Obviously, a big problem. This is life and death, and the military wanted to solve this. They got a team together of researchers to look at the data, right, and collect data. And what these people did is they went to all the planes that came back and started documenting where all the damage was at. And they came up with a pattern, something like this. It was quite insightful because what they saw was the pattern was pretty common across these. The bullets were found in the tail gunner, the center, and the wings. The tail gunner, the center, and the wings, over and over again. Now, this is super helpful because they wanted to put armor in just the right places because you can't make them too heavy, right, to get back. And so they looked at this and they thought they had their answer. Thankfully, on the team, there's a statistician by the name of Abraham Wald. And what he pointed out was there's a big chunk of data missing from their analysis, right? They were only looking at the survivors, right? What about all the planes that crashed, right? And when you start thinking about that, it's really pretty amazing because actually what these bullet holes show is where planes can take damage and survive. Where they need to put the armor is where there are no bullet holes. So this is a great story. And it's a great story of what they call survivorship bias. This is when we concentrate on people or things that have made it past some selection process, right? And overlooking those that did not. So if we think about that in the sense of our own process, right? Now, data-driven is super important to us, right? If you look for job descriptions, there's data-driven product management. We want design that's more data-driven. Data is fundamental to what we do. But is it potentially critically taking our focus away from where true insights and potentially massive growth lie? So let's look a little bit about survivorship bias in our own world. Right? So bounce rate, many of you who work on the web are probably familiar with this. A bounce rate is basically the percentage of people who show up on your web page, throw up, and leave. Right? And actually, a healthy bounce rate may be 45%. Look across this. If you look on mobile, this usually goes up around 65% being healthy, right? If we look at things like apps, right, and some of the industry data around that, about 25% of people will use an app more than once, right? So that means 75% of people have downloaded your app and not come. Therefore, all the data you're looking at in your events is based on the 25% of survivors. If you think about the world I come from, which is a lot about e-commerce, right? E-commerce, an amazing e-commerce conversion rate would probably be around 10%, 12% would be top of market. But if you look across the industry, it tends to be around 3% being a really, really happy conversion rate. If you look on mobile, that usually goes in half. So we're talking about 1.5% conversion rate of survivors that made it through our process, right? Now, this is certainly statistically significant, right? You have enough people to do A/B testing to get this through the process. But think about then, where do we tend to invest 80%, 85%, 95%, maybe 100% of our investment in BI and data engineering and user research, right, and market research tends to be on this 1.5 to 3%, right, focused on survivors. So why is that? You know, what about the 98.5% or 97% or even 70% of people who never show up in your data? We're often blind, I think, to why non-customers fail. Yet breakthrough products can be found in this and can be found in the data that maybe never shows up in our dashboards or models. So why do we tend to invest so little in non-customer insights? I mean, some of the answers are pretty obvious, right? It's expensive, right? It's expensive. It takes a lot of resources. It's kind of ambiguous, right? It's time-consuming. It can be risky. It's inconvenient. Actually, customers are way, way easier, right? Like, I can pull up a dashboard report, download it, put it in a PowerPoint document, and go off to my next meeting and show data, right, that can help us make decisions. If I want to do a survey, it's much easier to go pull a list of opt-in emails, maybe 30% survivor rate, send them an email, get a 10 to 15% response rate, but then 2 weeks from now, I can show a presentation that has real data based on customer research, right? It's much, much easier. We're also a business-driven culture, right? If you think of our stakeholders and clients, even the executives, most of them come from data-centric backgrounds, right? finance, potentially even engineering, marketing, operations. They like to see the good, hard data to help us make decisions. And that's much, much easier from our customer data. But there's other reasons in here that I think we want to talk about that are more inherent for us to understand. And these are things that we run into Moo and Blurb and previously all the time. And part of this is just saying, hey, are we aware of this, right? And how can it help us make better decisions where potentially we focused our investment? So the first is we look at the data we can easily collect, not always the data we need. Right? We have GA, we have Tableau, we have tons and tons of data, probably sometimes more than we can process. We assume that the data we can collect can actually answer all of our questions, right? If conversion rate is down at this part in the funnel, if I just look hard enough and ask the right questions and put enough JIRA tickets into my BI team, they will find the answer. But maybe the answer isn't there, right? For example, at Moo, I mean, sometimes we think about, hey, how often have we created a brand new KPI in the last 10 years of Moo? And it's not very often, right? Sometimes we'll identify something like a new customer segment. For example, we just went through this with designers. Designers are obviously super important to Moo. We have lots of creative people in there. And what we want to do is how do we identify designers on the site so we can increase conversion, increase their usage, increase their engagement. We tried to find some proxies and what's the best way to do this. Maybe they've self-selected. But then at the end of the day, if we can't track it and agree on that, we kind of go back to our regular, much broader conversion rate. Clayton Christensen of Innovator's Dilemma, if you've known that book, talks a lot about data being loud. About, 10, 12 years ago, I co-founded a company called Blurb, which is a self-publishing company, kind of a photo book company. When you start a new company, and this is really what happens a lot with startups, everyone is a non-customer, right? You have no data yet. Therefore, you have to go out, you have to meet people, you have to observe people, you see their problems, their gains. It's a very context-rich data gathering experience. And I think we've talked a lot about qualitative research here today. But as Blurb started to grow, when we started to get data, right, it starts to flow and it falls into what he calls the crisp precision of the spreadsheet. This crisp, clean data is right in front of me and it gives me a false deception of reality. And it's human nature to study this clean data, right? It's super, super loud. I've got a KPI report in the morning and a Slack channel that tells me more data, and then I can go to another meeting that has more data, right? That quiet data, the quiet data that comes from contextual interviews, from getting on and watching people, can really get lost amongst this really, really loud room. We model, and we model what we can. We tend to model what we know. And business cases, which is core to actually what we do a lot in product and even UX, illustrate growth usually on historical metrics. So Moo is going through our 2018 planning process, which is always a bit painful and wonderful at the same time. But when we take two potential business cases, right, one is about incremental products. So for example, we have a big range of different print products, and coming up to say, hey, a new finish, a new size of postcard, a new paper and flyers, some new sticker types is incremental growth. We can actually look past through the past 5, 10 years and see, when we introduced this before, this is the amount of growth we saw and the revenue from it. It's very trustworthy, high confidence product development. On the other side, say we want to go into an entirely new market, like packaging, right? We don't have a lot of experience. It takes more market research. It's kind of, we don't know. We have to get out there and talk to people. We may not find the time to do it. It's less confident. When you show those, and we're comparing, you know which one's going to win. Now, that can really be trusted, right? But again, it's limited to the data we have. So it'll always be incremental growth and potentially limit non-customer growth. And I can't say I have a big solution to this, but it's just worth acknowledging that as we look at business cases and how we go about it. I think we run into this every day, right? It's easy to confuse information with evidence, right? What we really want to do is measure outcomes, and that's kind of hard. But again, we have dashboards that show us facts. And BI would love to say, hey, do some self-service on this, right? You have sessions and visitors and conversion rate, right? If you think of things like Twitter even, the number of followers you have on Twitter may not actually represent your influence in the world. Just because it's measurable doesn't mean it's insights, right? A true insight synthesizes these facts together to come up with helpful decision making. And sometimes that's hard when we have so many facts around us. So some of you may be familiar with this photo. It's kind of hard in the background there. But basically, there's this concept of design paths. You may have heard before, a cow path, right? And what you see up here is that you have where the sidewalks are at and the roads are at and where the architects put this all together, right, and where they thought people would go. And then you have all the wiggly paths in between about where they actually go, right? So this is in some ways a representation of probably what people are trying to do with our data, right? And our organization is designed in a certain way, right? So example at Moo, we have 2 business units. We have a business unit we call SOHO, which is small office, home office, which what it was built on. This is the 1 or 2 person businesses. And then we have Moo Business Services, which is more for enterprise and larger businesses. And there's a breaking point of 10 employees. If you're 1 to 9 employees, you're in SOHO. If you're 10 plus, you go into MBS. We have entire P&Ls built around this difference. We have entire product teams built around this difference. And it's hard to go across these 2 areas sometimes, right? And we struggle with it. Because in the end of the day, there really isn't that much different from a customer need point of view or job to be done from a 9-employee business to a 10-employee business. I think we also fall under the delusion of a single explanation for things as well. As Fiona mentioned this morning, you know, life's complex, and even something as easy as seemingly easy as making a flight, has lots of decisions making. When, how much, when do we want to go, do we have a family, do we have not? All those decisions that come up and have to be made are not going to show up in the conversion funnel, right, and the GA topic on Finnair's GA deck, right? We launched this feature and conversion increased. May make it true, but in the end of the day, people are messy, right? And to get at that, it's kind of hard if you just focus on the data you have, right, because it doesn't have intent. Which kind of gets us to this final point, and I think this will really be preaching to the choir here, right? I think we all see the value in qualitative research and marrying them together. But the fact is, quant being better is deeply embedded in our culture, right? And this does limit us, right? So Indy Young, who's a UX researcher, one of the founders of Adaptive Path, said, somehow in our quest for confidence, qualitative knowledge ended up being positioned as the opposite of quantitative knowledge. If quantitative research is seen as producing qualitative knowledge, if quantitative research is seen as producing reliable and confirmable facts, then qualitative research is seen as the opposite, the soft, made-up, inapplicable knowledge. Right? And we know this isn't true, right? I think anyone that's gone out and doing customer research knows that's not true. It's hard to convince because qualitative answers the questions of why, right? Hey, because web metrics are kind of shitty at intent, right? As we know. Hey, time on page, our time on page went up. It's a shitty metric, I know. But it went up, you've heard this before. People must be engrossed in our content. Yeah, or they're lost, or they're in this tab over here watching videos, cat videos on YouTube, right? Conversion rate right down, but we don't know the why. So bringing these tools together, we understand is really, really important. So we can agree or disagree with these points prior, right? But I think we can agree that a good chunk of our potential growth is not captured in our primarily data-driven approach to product or design. So what are some tactics? I mean, how can we kind of get out of this round of kind of really, really focusing on the data right in front of us, right? And some of these would be quite obvious, right? And the first one is, to be quite blunt, get a budget. And what I mean by this is it's more expensive to get non-customer data. That's why people don't do it, right? It's to compare and contrast with customers. And in some ways, if you're going to do for example, when we do a non-customer survey at Moo, you need to go out and do it in the US. You need to find a panel that's 10K, 20K worth of investment. We need to do that. Right? So in thinking this through as you're going into your research plan for next year, your product plan for next year, try to integrate in your budget and hopefully use some of these ideas to integrate that in. Because at the end of the day, it does cost more, with the exception of some guerrilla areas. You can also ask the people with the money. And whether marketing is a friend or a frenemy, or maybe you're not even big enough to have a marketing team, marketing tends to have a couple things. One, they tend to do more market research than other parts of the organization, partially because, for example, at Moo, we spend millions of dollars every year in advertising. And so awareness and tracking that awareness is really important to us. So when I first joined Moo, there wasn't much non-customer research, and we still didn't have tons, to be frank. We have a lot more. But we had a thing called a brand tracker. And a brand tracker is a big survey that goes out twice a year, both to customers and non-customers, to try to track awareness and their success in awareness. As you dug down in the details, you had lots of great data there you could start to compare and contrast against company size and different pieces. And then the next time, we were actually able to insert some different questions and product questions in there. So many times marketing are asking surveys and getting out to talk to people. They may not be asking the right questions. Yep. Another approach is kind of pick a segment and go really, really, really deep into that. Right. So if anyone's read, there's a book called Blue Ocean Strategy. It talks about innovation, and they tend to categorize their non-customers into these 3 type of categories. And given the time we have left, there's a whole talk could go into this. It's super interesting. But what I really want to focus on today is just the soon-to-be non-customers. And the soon-to-be non-customers are these potential customers. They may not be your customers, but they're customers of the industry, right? So for Moo, it would be people buying print identity and promotional print, but they're really just waiting to jump ship, right? The current offering, they're waiting for something better to come along. They may have barely used you, but they're addressable, right? You can go out and find them. There may be people who have signed up for an email address or using your competition, right? If you go talk with them and observe them, what are the most common alternative to your product? What are the key reasons they want to leave our industry? And actually, they're kind of all around you, right? So here's an example. Wonderful email we got from Jan about a week ago, letting us know what's coming up. Find out who's attending, easily connect with people. That sounds great. Okay. I got to give a shout out to Mark for sending this on to me. But in general, this is really important to Moo, right? I mean, Moo was built on really business cards, right? And as we look at non-customers, many people will say, hey, ping is a great alternative to business cards and giving identity, right? We'll talk about jobs to be done in a minute, but that's kind of key to us to think about different uses of business cards. But it's also why we need to extend ourselves and not just be about business cards. It has to be about brand identity and brand touch points and promotional products and expand that out. Because we all know here, at some point in the next 5 years or 10 years, someone's going to come along with a great alternative to your product. Unless you're looking at non-customers, you're going to caught off guard. The more tactical piece, which I think many of you use, is things about web and mobile intercepts. So this is like the people coming to your site, before they bounce, grab them with a bail pop or grab them for a little interstitial. So there's many of these. I just want to talk about one we've used in the past called Ethnio. Ethnio has been around for many, many years. But basically you can see it pops up this little survey tool. What's awesome about this, though, is you're capturing people in real time. It's real-time recruiting. You sit there, they come in. You get them on the phone, they share their screen with you as they're using your site, right? So sometimes you'll get a recruiter and you're calling within 2 minutes. And you can try to get these people where they're trying to solve problems before they leave your site and bounce, right? So it's getting at those 40% of people that maybe did bounce or the 97% of people who never converted that are already on your site. And the final thing, again, which we talked a lot today, is really just getting out of the building, right? Non-customers are all around you. This is one of my favorite quotes that I've kind of adapted from Steve Krug, but it's really quite true, right? They're all around you. They're probably sitting next to you right now. They're really easy to get to. I imagine there's more non-customers of your product sitting around you right now than there are of your product, right? It's really easy to get to if we open ourselves up to it. Don't just leave this to your UX research team or your marketing research team, right? And when you get out there, observing is key. So I want to talk you through a little bit really quickly about how we've used jobs to be done to kind of get to this point a little bit. And this is a really high-level example. But you'll see how it gets to outcomes, right? So the product view of Moo is very much, hey, business cards and identity collateral, postcards and promotion. And this is actually how our product marketing team is organized. You then have the demographic view, which is like, hey, creative professionals, SMBs, enterprise. This isn't exactly how people think of themselves, right? But at least it's addressable from a market point of view. But once you start talking to people and you observe them and you get the jobs to be done, right? So our jobs to be done with Moo, right? Acquire leads, stand out, impress potential clients, look bigger than I am, survive my first year in business, right? That's that context and outcomes that actually will never show up in our data, right? It's going to be really, really hard for us to track the number of customers who survive their first year in business. But hopefully we start making these KPIs and working on it over the years, we'll get to that point. But I think we all know when we look at qualitative research and quantitative research, they are not the opposites, right? Those together are what really breakthrough happens, right? And bringing the data we know along with the data we don't have and recognize that is key, right? Stories are just data with soul, right? And that's where we have to find the soul. So revisiting this kind of myth about, well, it's actually really hard to find any metrics or data actually what really happened. A couple of people say that there's thousands of lives saved, it turned the war, but these mathematics and statistics were used on into the Korean and Vietnam War. Right? We don't know what we don't know, and that's okay. Right? We're often blind to why non-customers fail, right? The big opportunities to unlock real power is in the data that don't show up in our dashboards. So just to close, I have a quote from Dave McRaney who says, We must remind ourselves that when you start to pick apart the winners and the losers, the successes and the failures, the living from the dead, that by paying attention to one side of that equation, you are always neglecting the other. Thank you.